Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. Today, I'm going to be talking about the importance of narrative and storytelling for MBA applications. So I'll be sharing my screen. Um, Okay, without further ado, let's get started. So, in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share a little bit about myself and do some important context setting for MBA admissions. And then we'll spend the majority of the time talking about how to approach your business school application as an opportunity to tell an authentic and compelling story about yourself. I generally take a highly personalized approach to my Leland coaching, and I'd love for the session to be interactive. And so, with that, I'll talk you through the spiel I've prepared. But I really strongly encourage everyone to drop their specific questions in the chat throughout the session. And then I promise to get to all of them by the end of this meeting. So first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Katherine. I am currently a startup founder. I am an HBS class of 2024 graduate. So founder by day and Leland Coach by night. A bit about my professional career. So I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill and went immediately into management consulting at Monitor Deloitte in Chicago, like many of us do. Had a wonderful 3 years in consulting, and then ultimately wanted to transition to more innovation focused work. And so I spent 2 lovely years as a VC investor at S2G Investments, one of the largest dedicated climate tech funds where I focused on food and agriculture. It was around this time that I had an expiring GMAT and was really excited to explore MBA programs, and was fortunate to get into HBS, where I was a student from 2022 to 2024. During my time at HBS, I actually incubated my own startup. So I'm happy to talk with anyone afterwards about what it looks like to start a company as an MBA student. And that company is actually what I'm working on full-time now. And then beyond my sort of resume or CV, I wanted to share a little bit about my personal interests, a few of which I've listed here. And this is actually really relevant for what we're talking about today. And the reason for that is because I actually mentioned every single one of these interests on the screen throughout my applications to business schools. And it's important, right? We're talking today about not just all of the things you've done to get to this point in your career, including your resume, your stellar GMAT scores, your many accolades. We're talking today about how to really paint yourself as a holistic person in all of your own glory and interest for the purpose of getting into a wonderful MBA program. And so with that, let's talk about crafting your MBA application. But first, actually, I wanted to do a little bit more table setting before we get into the tactics of writing your essays and filling out your application. And first, that's about a little bit of numbers. So I've thrown some stats on the screen, but the point I'm trying to make is that, we're all really smart. There's a lot of people getting really amazing scores on the GMAT and GRE every single year. And there are just frankly more people outperforming in the GMAT or GRE than there are spots for even the top programs. So yes, resume bullets and GMAT scores are very, very important. They are kind of table stakes to get into these top programs, but it can't be the only thing that you focus on, and it's not the guarantee that's going to get you into school, which is why important storytelling matters. The second piece I want to touch on is just grounding us in what's happening when we're writing an application, and then what is happening when the admissions committees are reviewing your applications. These are actual people reading the screen, printing out, and individually reading everything that you've written, truly everything, and getting to know you. And so to that end, I really want to focus today on not just how you kind of tell a holistic and authentic story about yourself that highlights, all of your ambitions and goals and dreams and learnings, but also really wants to make the AdCom just get 30 minutes with you to learn more, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do with your application. You're trying to say, I'm someone who ought to be in this program that I'm applying for, and you should want to spend 30 minutes talking to me about why I would be a good fit. Because that's what gets you from an application to that interview. And then obviously the odds of getting the offer are much higher once you've gotten that interview. Finally, this last little piece of table setting before we get into crafting your application, I just want to touch on something that's become much more apparent now that I'm done with my program at HBS, and it's that personality really matters on a structural level for an MBA program. It's not necessarily like an academically structured graduate program where you're doing problem sets all day and in study groups. The entire curriculum is around discussion and debate and hypotheticals and making a point and backing it up. And so it's all about communication, and it's about bringing an interesting point of view in the classroom. And so again, when the admissions committee is reading your application, the questions that they're asking themselves are, is this applicant going to be someone who has a unique point of view that they can bring in the classroom? And are they going to be additive to their peers' experience? Meaning, have they done interesting things? Do they have interesting point of views? Have they learned things or seen things in their life, not just in their career, that's going to give them a unique perspective? So those are actually all really important things to convey in your application. So without further ado, let's dive into the components of the MBA application. And I'm sure at this point, especially for everyone who is applying R1, you're hopefully already getting into the nitty-gritty of the application and starting to fill it out. And you're probably at a point where you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And like there's a lot to answer and a lot to cover in the application. And I want to encourage you to think about all of those little spaces that you have to fill out as a huge opportunity to communicate a lot of different things about yourself. And so I want to talk about a tactic that was really helpful for me and some of my peers in filling out our application, ultimately getting acceptance letters, is sort of capturing your multitudes exercise. And I would encourage everyone to actually take index cards or sticky notes or I don't know, something like that, and just jot down not just all of your individual accomplishments, but all of your eccentricities and unique experiences and interesting things about yourself, so that you physically have them in front of you and you can put them out on a table, or I had a friend pen them up on her wall in her study as she was applying. So you really have a full sense of not just the things that you've been trained to think about in your resume and during your elevator pitch during interviews, but really who are you holistically, and what is everything that you bring to the table? Because then it becomes easier to start to think about how to slot all of those different components into different places in the application. In the application, generally speaking, across schools, I know all of them are a little bit unique, but generally speaking, there's a lot of different types of places to put different pieces of information, whether it's a short 200 character limit, tell me about your hobbies or extracurriculars, or tell me about your your awards and accolades formally. You have your essay, which we'll get to later in the session. You have short answer responses. You have your recommendation, which is huge real estate to have 2 opportunities for someone to just sing your praises. And so it's one about, making sure you're capturing all your multitudes and getting all of those little sticky notes and postcards slotted into your application. But it's also about being thoughtful about where you put different pieces of information, because you don't want to have the same information all throughout the application, kind of beating a dead horse about, this mountaintop experience you've had, or the best thing you ever did at work, or an award you got. You want to kind of allocate things intelligently to maximize each space. And what that looks like, and what I would recommend for you, is to think about your letters of recommendation as really the moments where you can highlight the most exceptional kind of accolades or things that you've done in your career that just make you, clearly like a leader, a go-getter, the best of whatever you've done. And my examples were, I had one of my mentors for my last VC role, and I had the chief investment officer from my last fund write about the most important pieces of work I did in those past 2 years, and how I made a unique contribution, and how I took charge and was a leader. And they did a ton of like facts and figures gloating about me in that space. And what that meant was that I didn't have to talk about those things anywhere else in my application. And I let them do all the like gloating for me. And then I got to use my application space to talk about some of the different nuances of things that I enjoy. And so if we think about those interests that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I bring them up again because they actually came up in my interview. So I think it was like in the HBS application, there was a 200 character, tell me about your hobbies section of the application. And I thought, why not just have a little fun with this? Because I have a lot of hobbies. And so I wrote about how I tended to a community garden in my neighborhood, how I had learned to skateboard during COVID, how I bike to work every day and bike along the lakefront in Chicago. And, I was just very honest about the things that I enjoy and spend my time on that have nothing to do with my career. And I actually ended up spending 10 minutes of my 30-minute HBS interview talking about those things, and really having like a disarming and organic conversation with my interviewer about how she wanted to make sure I was wearing a helmet when I skateboarded, and, the longest, most interesting bike ride I've been on. And so when you allow yourself to show your full self, that's going to be interesting, and make the adcom want to lean in a little bit more. And you never know what piece of information they're going to pick out or be most interested in during the interview. And so it's a delightful opportunity to just give yourself the chance to talk about things that make you smile. So moving on to the essay. This is obviously like more of the hurdle of conquering and submitting the application, just because it's, a really long and central piece of real estate in the application. But it's also an opportunity to really ask these big, almost like philosophical or existential questions before you even start writing a structure or an outline for the essay. And so tying in that last piece about, the postcards and allocating things in the right places, I would say by the time that the admissions team reads your essay, they've already read the rest of your application. So they've read your recommendations. They know what a fabulous job you've done in your career. They know your test scores. They know all of these other great things about you. So I would advise against wasting the essay real estate on those sort of like patting yourself on the back or like puffing your chest moments. I would instead use the essay to really be like introspective about your core passions and your humanity and things that you've learned in your life, and also your vision. And so more specifically, I wanted to cover a few guiding questions that I think everyone should be asking themselves in this period where you still have a few weeks before you have to submit your application. If you're doing R1, you certainly have more time if you're doing R2. And it'll allow you to just be more thoughtful and open-ended about what you might write about and what speaks to you before you're in that nerve-wracking stage of like sitting with your Word doc open, trying to hammer out a final product. And so what these questions might look like are the 4 that I have on the screen. So like, what and who do you want to be? What experiences have shaped that vision of what and who you want to be? What are you actually passionate about? Is it, breaking into private equity and being the first person in your family to go into finance? Is it starting a company? Is it changing the healthcare system? Like, what do you really think about that is effortless for you to think about? And the thing that your mind wanders to when you've had a long day or when you're feeling most excited. And then finally, and I really want to stress this, why is getting an MBA necessary for your vision? I think this is where a lot of people maybe falter on this last piece of why is getting an MBA necessary, because they spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about what they're interested in and what their passions are and their 5 to 10 year plan for themselves, and then they kind of rush or don't really get to the last piece, which is why should this school give you a very valuable space in their class to learn from faculty, peers, all the alumni and experiences, and also contribute to that experience for other people. And so it's really important to actually ask yourself, like, why is it that you're going to get an MBA right now? And why is this a thing that is important for your career, not just immediately out of school, whether you want to double down on a career or pivot to something else, but why is it going to be important 5 to 10 years down the road? And you don't always know the answer to that, but it's important to ask that question and be truthful with yourself about why it is you're going to this program. And then kind of just like the bottom piece around program specific framing. Even though there are different prompts for different schools, they're all generally asking the same questions of like, tell me about yourself and what your interests are. But you, of course, want to adjust the essay a little bit based on the program you're applying for. That might look like leaning into leadership if you're applying to HBS and management, highlighting, entrepreneurship if you're applying to GSB, finance if you're applying to Wharton or Booth. So just things like that, but still staying true to yourself. And another piece of tactical advice for this portion of the process is I would really start to carry around like a journal or a notes app, or what I even did was leave myself voice memos and just take walks or do something meditative to jog your mind about all of these questions. And before you start to think about how you fit this into an essay, I would just write down thoughts that come to your mind, especially the ones that come, really forcefully to the front of your mind when you're asking these questions, because that's going to be the best content that you can then use to craft your essay, and actually put the compelling story on paper that feels really authentic to you. Because at the end of this whole process, you don't just want to submit something that you feel like, is impressive and will impress the ad committee, but you want to feel like you really captured your full self in the application, and what you're sending off is the best representation of who you are. Because that means that if you get in and you go to that program, they've let you in for all of the beautiful, amazing things about you that will set you up to succeed and have a fruitful experience in the program. So next, I want to talk about what to avoid really quickly, because I think that's also as important as what to focus on. So procrastination. I think everyone still has a really decent amount of time to, even if you haven't started, crank out your R1 application and get it done, or start thinking about R2 deadlines. The reason you don't want to procrastinate, beyond obvious reasons of, avoiding undue stress, is you can't really effectively perform that exercise of journaling and thinking and voice memos if you're rushing. So give yourself the space to be thoughtful and then transition to writing, and it'll be a lot easier and faster of a process. The other part about procrastination is you're not going to give yourself enough time to have a lot of people review, especially your essay. I think I had about 15 colleagues, peers, friends, mentors read my essay before I submitted it. And that was really helpful, not because, I drastically changed the core message of what I wrote about, but there were a lot of just little things that mattered about how I explain certain things and how I use the word limit and how much time I gave to different elements of the story that in your head, it all makes sense and you think it's kind of self-evident. But once you have a lot of other people reading that, it becomes very clear what you need to tweak. And so, even the best writers in the world have copy editors. You should give yourself time and space to have your own copy editors, whether it's me or someone else checking your work. The other thing to avoid is indecision. I have a lot of clients ask me about what to do and what to say in their application if they really truly don't know exactly what they want on the other side of the MBA. They're going to explore their career, consider different options. I think that all of those are very valid, reasons to pursue an MBA. And you could still take like really full advantage of an MBA when you go in an exploratory mode. But I would communicate that and communicate an intention to explore rather than communicating an indecision of like, well, I don't know what I want to do, so I'm going to go get an MBA. Obviously, that doesn't sound great, so probably best to avoid. One thing quickly is pandering. I think a lot of these different schools have different reputations of things they focus on. While you do want to tailor your message a little bit based on, what you want out of the program that you're applying for specifically, I wouldn't try and reverse engineer what you think they want to hear and put that into an essay. It's not going to be authentic to you. If you get an interview or you get in, you're not going to enjoy that experience because it was based on a pretense. And so, this whole thing is about being authentic to yourself, feel good about what you're writing, make it true to you. The last thing is sugarcoating. I actually think there's a really big opportunity throughout this application, and especially in the essay, to really talk about professional struggles that you've had and problems that you've overcome. I think it's sort of like ridiculous to assume that all of us have not made any mistakes in our career, in our life, and have just done everything perfectly. We also know that when those mistakes happen, they're sometimes the greatest, most fruitful learning opportunities that we have. And so that's actually really great content to incorporate in your application, to not emphasize, I messed up in this way, but to say, I had this journey of getting to the other side of a really difficult time or circumstance, and I'm even better for that. And this is the perspective that I have. And this is how, I do things differently or better because of that. Again, the AdCom is looking for different perspectives and lived experiences. And to the extent that you can talk about all of those, even if they're a little bit thorny, is ultimately going to make your application stronger. I still want to leave time for questions, but wanted to end with a little bit about my approach to consulting and what I offer on Leland. I offer career and life coaching, but also, especially now, I'm focused on personalized MBA admissions and guidance. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I really like to offer kind of a holistic and also very bespoke and tailored coaching style for all my clients because everyone's different. And so, with MBA admissions guidance in particular, I'm pretty flexible between hourly coaching. I have clients just book, an hour to get thoughts and feedback on an essay draft or feedback on mock interviews. And then I also offer a more holistic full package for end-to-end admissions guidance from should I be applying to school? Which school should I be applying to? Help me craft my entire application. So I do it all. And then on the left or on the right is just a bulleted out list of all the things that I offer, but it's pretty much, if it's anything related to MBA admissions, I'm here to help. I'll send these links in the chat when I'm done sharing, but here are 2 links for working with me if you love what I had to say and want to dive in deeper. I am offering for the next 2 weeks 10% off your first session if you book with me. That's the code Katherine M MBA. And yes, that'll be live for the next 2 weeks. So with that, I will stop sharing and I would love to get to everyone's questions. So Rishi asked, will you send the slides to us? Yes, after this call, I will definitely be sending the slides to everyone. Would love to everyone to have these as they're working on their applications. And then Rishi also asks, what are the differences between new and old HBS values? I've heard old is way more holistic and does not require as much policy and procedure as new values. Yeah, I don't have a firm answer to that. I'm kind of trying to figure out in real time what old and like what the question you're asking, Rishi. I would say just, look at the averages of different programs like HBS, look at the GMAT and GRE scores adjusted for the new scoring. Look at how many years of work experience, just think about what you have to offer and focus on your application in that way. rather than trying to think about what they're looking for. Because again, as I said, it's hard to kind of pander and guess and predict what the adcoms are looking for. It's best to just put your best foot forward. So that's what I'd have to say. And then Tomiko asks, what would you say is the best way to decide what caliber of schools you should be applying to? I think a good starting point is things like, what sort of scores did you get in undergrad? Did you come from non-target or target school? What is your GMAT? All of those things that we know were kind of table stakes for certain programs. And then I would also think about, same as applying to undergrad programs, what are your reach schools, and then what are your safety schools? The benefit of the round 1 and round 2 is you can apply to reach schools round 1, hear back before round 2 deadline if you've gotten N. Well before that if you get an interview, and then you can apply to other programs after that. So that's what my recommendation to say. I think everyone should shoot for the stars with MBA programs. You really never know if you'll get in or not, or what they're looking for year to year to build a holistic class. So apply to the tricky ones round 1, apply to more safety schools round 2. Tim asks, what are thoughts on letters of rec coming from undergrad professor? I would generally prioritize more recent employers or any employers over undergrad professors, unless you have a really meaningful and meaty relationship with them. For instance, if you worked with them a lot, if you developed research with them or wrote a thesis, or like a thesis or something like that with them, I would focus on employers. Cedric asks, conflict. It said that conflict drives a good story. This is true. What is your approach on this, especially if there's no visible conflict in someone's background? I think this is a good question. I think conflict can mean a number of different things. I think that there are things like personal tragedy, and there are things like getting fired or do like something like that that's like very obvious. But I think there's also a lot of conflict that we experience every day in a number of different ways that shape us. I'll give an example of the essay that I wrote. So I was focused on the food system prior to school. I thought a lot about the food system during my time at HBS. I wrote an essay about how my parents couldn't afford organic food growing up, and all of our vegetables were canned, and we ate a lot of potatoes and canned corn and junk food. And then I went from that to working for one of the largest VC funds for agriculture and food tech, creating healthier outcomes. And so I wrote about the tension between, wanting to invest in sustainable and healthy food, but also wanting to make sure that those solutions were affordable and accessible for people like my parents. And so that kind of creates this tension of like, here's something I experienced as a kid, here's something that I'm pursuing now. There's a tension here, and here's how HBS is going to help me in my career solve this tension. So that's an example of a conflict. I know we're getting close on time, so I want to speed through and make sure I get to all of the rest. Some people have these unique stories like donating a kidney, homelessness, relative in prison. Do you need to find such unique aspect to create essay hook? No, this is a good question. I really want to reemphasize, like, conflict looks like a lot of different things. And passion is really important too. Like, I don't think that people really necessarily get into an MBA program based on, this sounds kind of like a brash phrase, but like a sob story. I don't think someone can say, this is a tragic thing that happened to me, so I should get into an MBA program. I think whatever people write about, it needs to have some level of, this is where I'm going. This is my big vision for my life. This is how, I want to be like a business leader in the world and make a difference and do these things. And so whatever it is, whether it's about donating a kidney or, having an interest that you want to explore, like, that's also very important. Don't minimize your own interests and passions and problems you're trying to solve because they don't feel like the donating a kidney example. And then Danielle asks, what if you don't have a ton of extracurriculars or activities outside of work? How do you build a cohesive narrative beyond your professional work? This is a good question. I know a lot of us have spent like many years of working 80 to 100-hour weeks, and there's not really time for extracurricular. So I would just think about, maybe it's not a formal extracurricular, but something that you enjoy, even if it's something like, like the concept of systems-based thinking, or like a certain concept at work that you're working on, or a certain project that you've really enjoyed that has encouraged you to explore something intellectually or in your own time. I think with these topics more broadly of conflict or passions or extracurriculars, like, don't feel like it has to be donating a kidney and playing on your intramural soccer team. It could be like anything that makes you unique. And so I know we're out of time and it looks like there's no more questions. So I really want that to be the closing thought. Really be exploratory and expansive about the things that make you, the things that make you enjoy life, and go from there. I'm going to stay on because I'm seeing more questions. I understand that a lot of people have to drop, so I'm going to drop the links to my Leland page and that discount code for those who like it. I'll be sending that information after the call. For those who have more questions, keep them coming and I'll answer them now. Trevor asks, how would you craft a story about neurodivergence? This is obviously something that's very personal, and I can't be too prescriptive about your personal experience or personal experience of the person who has neurodivergence. I would, Trevor, use both the essay and then maybe the addendum, like explain yourself, or is there anything else we want to know, you would like to share, portion of the application to talk about these things, and really kind of talk about, lean into this whole idea that there's different kinds of smart people, or there's different like forms of smarts. I think Jeff Bezos had that quote about, the older he gets, the more he learns that there are a lot of different types of smart people. And so lean into what makes you excellent and what skills you have. And while there may have been, quote unquote shortcomings on some of the marks in the admissions process, like, I'm sure you excel in a lot of other ways that are non-obvious to other applicants. And so you obviously want to address maybe these shortcomings head on, but you also want to talk about, like, I may not have this thing, but I also have this other thing in spades, and I want to talk about that. And here's how I'll be the unique addition to the classroom. Someone else asks, how do we focus on family situations that impact career outcomes, including being a caregiver? I think it's really, this question of how to address is just to speak truthfully about how it's impacted you. I think the great thing about MBA programs is, and I was shocked by this, there are a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and life experiences and ages and countries of origin and everything, under the sun that could be used to categorize someone's experience. Everyone's different. And so I think that a lot of programs really celebrate those differences, but they just want to know how it's impacted you. And so I would just be honest about what it's looked like to be a caregiver and be a professional, and why you've made choices that you have, and really especially how getting an MBA is going to help put you in a different situation if that's what you want to be in. And that's kind of really important. And I think it's especially interesting to say, here's what my experience has been. Here's why getting an MBA will be profound for me in the trajectory of my life and the lives of the people who rely on me. How do we address lower GPA in undergrad? I think if you're feeling really good about other aspects of your application, I would not emphasize it that much. But if you think it's one of many kind of holes in your application, I would address it. I think, be honest about the circumstances that led to the low GPA, talk about how you're different or changed from that time, and then move on. No need to like create a sob story. For instance, I didn't have an exceptional GPA in undergrad, but I had a stellar 99th percentile GMAT score. And so I didn't address my GPA, my low GPA in my application, because I felt that my GMAT spoke for itself in terms of test taking and academic rigor. Someone asked if I could share my LinkedIn. Let me pull up the link and I will drop it. in the chat in a second. Someone asked about 6-month gap in employment. This is sort of an opportunity to like take advantage of conflict or like unexpected things in life. I would talk about like, what did you learn in those 6 months? How did they impact who you are? Like, how did you navigate the difficulty of that transition? I would say like a lot of my peers at HBS have resume gaps now because they didn't get jobs right out of school, or they're switching between jobs because they didn't like the job that they took right out of school. Or I've talked to many alumni who are 5 to 10 years out from their programs, and they inevitably had career gaps because they got laid off, or their company folded, or they needed to figure out their life, or they had a sick loved one. Like, I think if we did destigmatize the employment gap and then think about what you learned as part of that experience, then that's going to be probably best for your application. Danielle asks, what if you have a traditional MBA background where many colleagues with similar backgrounds are also applying for an MBA? How do you make yourself stand out? That's a great question. The short answer is, like if you're a consultant or banker, they're going to let in a lot of consultants and bankers. Figure out what has made you really unique in your peer set. And I would say, in particular, make sure you have a really strong letter of recommendation from someone who can really speak to how you are like N of one or N of few in your cohort and why you're exceptional professionally. To the extent that you can do that, I think it's going to be helpful. Sarvesh was asking, I was a transfer student initially from, but this is rather specific. I wouldn't mention it. I think a lot of people transfer programs undergrad. Undergrad was like kind of a long time ago for a lot of applicants. And so I think there's a little bit less of an emphasis on it. So I wouldn't maybe necessarily mention it. You can just mention that you graduated with your certain bachelor's program degree and leave it at that. Will we get a recording of this session? I believe that Leland records this and loads it to my profile and their Leland Plus resources. That being said, I would encourage everyone who found this helpful or has additional questions to set 15 minutes with me. I, as part of my MBA promotion, will be giving everyone who wants it 15 free minutes of trial to talk through where you are in your MBA application process, and if I can be helpful with additional coaching. So happy to answer more of these questions during that time. If no one has any more questions, I'm going to run. It was great to be able to talk at everyone today. Would love to have conversations with anyone who's interested in chatting more. And I wish everyone the best of luck with their application and career. Bye, everyone.